And as you can see, I've started organizing my wires. They run through the sides here and here and from the top. So that looks pretty clean, and this is all of it that's gonna go to the front. Like so, all my lights, servos from the back get routed very cleanly around, held by clips, and then I drilled 2 holes through here to get those wires to the front. So we are working on the air lines for the gear and brakes, and here it's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but it's doable. So you can see that I chose red and blue for my locking air cylinder. So they go to the air cylinder, and then I chose yellow and orange. It's gonna be for the gear cylinder. For the brakes I chose white just because I painted the gear white, so it's kind of nice to have that disappear. And the lines for the brakes are, in my opinion, the easiest to mount or to figure out, because basically I just looked at what the DerJet manual specified, and I just copied that. So just run them down, and those get run behind the gear, sort of like so. And then I drilled a hole in the sidewall here to get them through to the inside. The thing that I want to note here is when you're doing the locking cylinder, what I had to do is unscrew that tiny screw, and then with that you can tilt the locking cylinder out. And then if you have a hemostat, which is this guy right here, you can kind of, one with a bent nose, you can kind of pinch the tube and slide it onto the nipple. And that was the same trick I used to get the yellow airline that goes to the rear, to the cylinder for pushing the gear down. So that's very difficult to get to, but if you have one of these, and I'm going to recommend people get these, it just makes that so much easier. So we're going to use orange for our gear up position, and that's also going to just get routed all the way down there. The other important thing to note here is that as I'm mounting the air lines, I am moving my gear and making sure that it doesn't obstruct the gear. So far that looks good. Here's how the airlines worked out. I have my orange, which is my gear up, and it's just bent kind of tight around there and goes to the brake line and gear down line. I cinched them together. This is not tight, it's just to keep the cables bundled together, and then that goes through the access hole in the side into the center. And then the locking cylinder airlines, there they are, the red and blue. The red locks the cylinder, the blue unlocks it, and those again are just gonna sit there. I'm gonna bundle them together, and they're going through the access hole. It looks like that doesn't impede the gear at all. The gear is able to come in and out just fine, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So the plumbing for the airlines is looking pretty good. So all my gear doors and brakes, so the gear doors are red and blue, gears yellow and orange, and then white is the brakes. They're all teed right here, and then those lines go forward. So I'm pretty happy with that, how that came out. And I used some organizers to get that wiring to look clean and organized on both sides. So there are my brake tanks on top, and they're just attached using Velcro on the back. Same scheme that I used for these guys. So I'm gonna put my T, just like I did the T for the gear tanks. Same thing goes up here, and we're gonna route that line down this way or down that way into the rest of them. So the brake line has been routed. So I used a different airline because I found that what comes in the kit was actually brittle and it just broke. So I don't know, it was a little bit stiff, so I'm not gonna use that and or recommend using that. Just get your airline from DreamWorks, BVM, whoever, and use it. So this is 3mm airline, and I just routed behind the former, and it comes down this way and meets up with the rest of the airlines and comes down to the front. So the reason I did this is because when the nose comes in place, so you'll see the nose right here, the air intake's right in the middle. And so what I wanted to do is keep this as clear as possible so that the air has enough place in a straighter path to go into the turbine. Obviously the turbine will draw whatever air it needs from wherever, but just to make it easier, it also looks much cleaner. So let's get that nose on. In order to join that piece to this piece, your hardware kit comes with 7 M4 by 15mm screws. They look like that. So you'll have 7 of the big washers, and those go onto the to these M4 screws, and where they're gonna go is from the rear fuselage. They're gonna go through there from sort of the back end and screw into the threads that are on that front piece. So if we look in here, let's get close. You can see there are threads in there, and that's where the screws are gonna attach. So I stuck the provided screws into the fuselage, and you see they fit almost exactly. So if I think of the front part of the fuselage that's gonna attach here, I think that this is gonna be just right into the blind nut in there. Before I join this, I want to mention 2 things. One is that these are mini bundles of wire and airline. So what I like to do is split them up into left and right bundles, and the reason for that is because I kind of know what goes on the left side versus what goes on the right side. So when I do it this way, then when I put this whole mess in here, I can basically figure out what side is what. The next thing I want to mention is I thought about using connectors to do all the electrical connections from the rear fuselage to the front. That way it makes service easier, in the sense that taking apart the nose part from the base is easier because you just have disconnections here and then the two come apart. The problem I faced with that is that I would need to have quick disconnects for air, and they may leak over time. I'm not sure about that. So what I decided to do is just leave everything connected. But what I'll do is, obviously at a weight penalty a little bit, is keep enough of the wire and airline so that I can at least do what I'm doing here, which is, you know, if the airplane was to be disassembled, there should be enough of this stuff in here that I can at least pull this apart close like that, you know, almost 90 degrees, so that way I can get. You can see that those wires have been put in the nose half, and you can see roughly how much length I will need so that I can in future be able to pull the nose half from the rear half. And there's plenty of room in the jet, in the nose section here, for me to stash these wires and airlines. So assembling this, putting the nose together, is, I'm not gonna lie, a biggest pain in the ass whatsoever. So basically you can see what setup I have in here, and I have the jet turned upside down because that way I can kind of see there's 4 screws of the M4s that go on sort of that form over there, and 3 on the bottom. And these on the top are easy because you can kind of see, let's see, where is it? You can kind of see one there, so I can reach it from here, and then there's a second one, which is where my screwdriver contraption is. So there's two on each side, so I can reach those. The one that's going to be a pain in the butt, I think, are the ones that go, I think, right around here somewhere. I think it's like here and here. But anyways, so this is going to be the easiest way. You're going to need some sort of bendy tool to access that location so you can tighten your screws. And then obviously you have to make sure that the first time you put this together, everything is kind of loose, and then you got to come back around once you've fitted all the gaps and made sure everything is properly aligned, and then tighten everything. And that is going to be a pain in the butt. There is a screw that goes right around this area. So we did the 4 top ones. So there's 1 here, 2, 3, 4, and then there's 3 on the bottom. 1 goes right here on either side. And to get to that, this is really difficult to show on camera, but with a tank moved off center like that, you do have access to get to that spot from the side in here. So I'm going to install my tool and driver in here, aim for it, and then tighten that down. Same for the other side, and then the last and easiest one is right down the middle in between the tanks, which I'll show as well. And finally, the last but not least hole, which in my opinion is the easiest, is right in front of this. And that spot is the easiest. The easiest screw to secure the rear into the front fuselage. Last tip, I obviously showed that you gotta have something bendy. In my case, this is what I got, because you need to get into the screws at an angle. But the tip that I have is, because you need that screw to hold on to the driver without any support, I just added, let's see if I can show this, just a little bit of hinge tape to the tip of my driver. You can see it right there. Very thin layer, and what that helped do is when I put the screw on, it just adds a little bit of tension so that now the screw is held in place by itself. So the other way to do this is, they do sell wrenches that have a little fabric tip that will grab onto the screw, but this was my tip, and that's how I was able to get this monstrosity of a gadget in there to secure everything in place. We're on the front half of the jet, and you can see there's still plenty of room and there's decent access. I can get my whole hand in there. So let's get to organizing the front end. So I just showed all the wires that I need to get organized in the front end, but unfortunately my F35 did not come with these plates. I don't know if they're supposed to ship with the mounting plates. I guess they are, because they're in the manual. So I just made one by myself, thank God for math, so that looks good. And the gear seems to work really well. So you can see it comes up and doesn't obstruct at all, which is good. So now we're going to go ahead and mount all of our components, and we might paint this these set of equipment trays. Let's talk equipment trays. So on my jet, since I have only the mains and the brakes being air driven, I'm gonna need 2 valves. I'm gonna need obviously the Electron controller for the nose gear and for the servos that are on the gear doors, as well as ECU, Smooth Flight 16, and a few other things. So what I'm trying to say is, the way the tray comes, the cockpit takes pretty much most of the front. The sides are kind of open in here, but I have my servo, so there's not really much room on either side. So basically, the room that I have is basically from here backward. And so in order to get everything to work well, what I decided to do was, the jet comes sort of open like that on the former that holds the gear, this guy. And so I've already CA'd one of the sides, but I basically made these plates just conforming to the side of the jet. And what these are is, they're gonna drop in like that, and they're gonna get glued, epoxied in place And so my hope is that when that's epoxied in place, that I'm gonna have a lot more deck space on the bottom side. I weighed this, and this was almost 100 grams, I think. The BVM UAT is about half of that weight, and so I'm gonna try to build this weight consciously, given that I'm adding all this extra stuff in here. So that's the plan, and I'll show you when all that stuff is coming along. So here's what the front looks like. It's a bit messy, but essentially all my wiring is almost done. So we have all the wires that are going to come to the top. That's these guys, and then you have my valves on the side here, and those have been plumbed. So we have our lock valve, gear valve, and finally our brake valve. I got this Festo connection here because this is what's going to hook up to the Zycoy plate with the Zycoy controller for the failsafe, and I'm using a quick disconnect Festo, which is good. So in terms of the wiring in there, it is fairly neat. Let's see if we can zoom in. I could, you know, tidy it up, and I probably will a little bit more, but this works out. My UAT is gonna go right here, and as you can see, it's already been plumbed. My Zycoy pump is gonna sit right here, so nice short travel. I want to see how that works, if that bend is too sharp or not. It looks fine to me for now, but we'll see. So the next thing will be to figure out where my shut-off valve will go. I think it'll go on the plate up top right in here, and then go right to the back. All of my lights, my unit lights, the controller is sitting right there, and that's the lights that are plugging into the wings and the gear, the nose gear lights. So that, I thought that was a pretty good spot for that controller to sit, and it's just held down to the electron with hot glue. So little isopropyl, can remove that, and then 2 screws up top, and we're good to take that off. So just a few more final touches left here to go, and then hopefully we can put this guy on his legs and get it going. Alright, so here's the final setup of what the front of the F35 looks like. You can see I added those connectors to the tray there, and those connectors play a dual role. One obviously is that they connect to all the components that are in the jet, so the turbine, smooth flight, etc. But the second part, which is really cool, is that they actually help keep the batteries in place. So you can see with those connectors, these batteries cannot move back. Obviously they cannot move up because there's a bulkhead here, and they cannot move side to side because that's restricted as well. And then the plate that the batteries is sitting on has just a little bit of Velcro to help keep everything tight. So that's sort of the lightest that I could figure out how to put the cockpit in place, and sort of put labels and everything. And the jet comes with, or has, main gear that are air driven, and in my case I changed the gear doors to be servo driven, so that's great. And so we need main gears to be sequenced. We need the main gear doors, the front ones, to be sequenced because those are going to be closed when the gear's down, but the nose gear doors on the jet are going to be open when the gear's down, and then all the gears are obviously closed when the gear's up. So to do that, this is the sequence that I've programmed, and I will explain a couple of things that I ran into. So right now we have our gear down position. This servo is representing the nose gear door. This is representing the main gear doors in the front. Obviously there's going to be 2 of these, so I'm going to have to wire those. There's also going to be 2 of these. I'm going to have to wire those together. And then this is the lock, and then this is the gear. So when I go gear up, what I would like to see is this guy should open so that both doors are open. Then the lock and the gear should go almost simultaneously, and then both doors should close. And then when we open the gear doors, we should see both of these. When we open the gear or lower the gear, we should see both of these open, the lock and gear trigger, and then the mains will go back up. The other thing to mention is I programmed my gear
valve right here. You can see right now I'm in the gear down position and I'm on the red light. This is just looking at forums that talk about this. With these Jetronic valves, they tend to fail safe on this, so this is the side that you want to program with gear down, not the green side. So let's go through the sequence and then I'll show you what that is and what I had to change. So if we go from gear down, so main gear door is open, and that takes about 7 seconds, and I'll explain why. It seems overly long, but then the gears and lock go. That takes another 7 seconds, and then we should see both of these close, and that's perfect, and we're now in the gear up position. And then in the gear down, from gear up, the gear door is open. 7 seconds later, we're gonna see these click. There we go. And then 7 seconds after that, we're gonna see just this guy close. There we go. And we're now in gear down and everything is checking out. So let's go over to the computer and I can talk about how I had to get this to work. Here's the sequence that I'm using for the FlySafeJets F35. We have gear down condition, and then what happens in step 1, 2, and 3 before you get to your gear up. So here's what I found. You can see that in my case, usually your gear would go into slot 1, and then all your other stuff would go into 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, if I put my gear in channel 1, and then lock in channel 2, 3 nose gear, 4 and 5 becoming the main gear doors, what happened was the upward sequence worked just fine. The problem was on the downward swing, which is supposed to replay this sequence backwards. I was actually getting that as soon as I flicked the switch, the gear would come down, which is not what I want. And then once the gear come down, like the doors would then open, which is not what I like. And I played with moving the lock and the gear, and it just didn't work. The point was, at some point, 2 of the channels were clicking simultaneously, even though they were not supposed to. And someone else, Auburn02, had actually experienced this exact problem, and it was driving me crazy. The solution to that was to not use channel 1 for your gear, and move the gear to channels 2, and then lock to channel 3, which means that channel 4 would be my nose gear doors. So this should say nose gear, not nose gear door, and channel 5 would be my main gear doors. So if I treated the gear as if it was an auxiliary channel, then everything worked fine. And so in here, the way I did my system is open, or O is going to show an extended condition, and C is going to show a retracted condition. So in gear down, we want our gear extended. We want our lock extended because our lock is keeping our gear to remain extended. And then the nose gear door is going to be extended as in open, but the main gear doors are going to be retracted, closed. And then I programmed 7 seconds here, and what's in bold here is the change. So when you hit the gear up switch, the first thing that happens is that the main gear doors will go into the open condition because they were closed, we want them open, and that's all happening. Does it take 7 seconds? No, it probably takes way shorter than 7 seconds. But bear with me, I'll explain why that number's there. And you'll notice there's a symmetry here. There's 7 seconds here and 7 seconds here and almost nothing in the middle. And then once 7 seconds later, we go and we close our gear and our locks. So the way this gear system works with replaying it backwards, it only works for simpler cases where you have all your gear doors wired together and your gear just going up and down. In other words, your gears stay open when your gear's down, and your gear doors stay closed when your gear's up. So there's no modes. So usually most controllers will have like a mode which allows you to keep your gear doors closed, or a set of them. This one, as far as I can tell, doesn't do that. So anyways, so in this case, gear down, you flick your switch up, gear doors in the main gear doors open, and then your gear and your lock close. And then the last step is all the gear doors closed. And then the backward is that you start with your gear doors closed. And then here's why this 7 seconds is, because you go from gear up to step 3, and really nothing's changing except your main gear doors and your nose gear doors. So that's going to take 7 seconds. And the reason for that 7 seconds is, you see, from gear up to opening, it takes 7 seconds in the backward. But when you're going forward, because this step is where you go from gears being down to gears being up, that step is 7 seconds. But when you're going backwards, because of how this works, that step 3, the transition is from gear closed to still gear closed. So it doesn't work on the backward swing, which is why the 7 seconds is here. Because once you open your doors, then the next step, this step here, when you're going downwards, this step is actually the transition from your gear and your lock being closed to your gear and your lock being extended. So it's kind of annoying, because on the one way it takes 7 seconds to open a gear door, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. But then you need that, because when you're replaying this back, it'll take 7 seconds to open your gear and lock, and that's why that's there. And so that sequence works well.